In the winter of 1848, as a cold wind swept across the American frontier, life in the newly claimed territory of California was quiet, distant, and largely ignored by the eastern states. Fewer than 15,000 settlers lived across the vast expanse, sharing the rugged land with native nations who had called it home for thousands of years. The region was isolated, far from national concerns, and certainly far from the dreams and ambitions of the average American worker. But everything would change with a single discovery, one so simple, so accidental, and so unexpected that it would set the entire world into motion. Because on January 24, 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall saw a glint beneath the water of a sawmill channel, and the world caught its first spark of gold fever. Marshall crouched near the flowing waters of the American River, the sound of wooden beams and rushing streams filling the air. He reached into the cold current, retrieving a small, shining nugget that reflected the early morning sun. At first, he said nothing. It seemed impossible, too surreal to trust his own eyes. But his discovery at Sutter's Mill would ignite one of the most dramatic mass migrations in world history, drawing fortune seekers from every continent. And soon, California would transform from a remote outpost to a global magnet for ambition, greed, hope, and heartbreak. Before the gold rush, California was a land claimed by the United States but scarcely controlled by it. The Mexican-American War had recently ended, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo had handed the region to the U.S. only months before Marshall's discovery. The land was rich with natural beauty, towering redwoods, fertile valleys, and winding rivers, but sparsely populated by American settlers. Most of the non-native population consisted of Californios, Mexican ranching families whose vast lands grazed thousands of cattle. Indigenous communities, from the Miwok to the Maidu, thrived in the region long before either Mexico or the U.S. set foot there. Their societies were complex, deeply tied to the environment, and structured around trade networks and seasonal migrations. But soon, their world would be thrust into a conflict they never anticipated, a flood of outsiders that would reshape the land forever. Life in Northern California in early 1848 was steady, slow, and largely agricultural. Sutter's Mill, owned by Swiss immigrant John Sutter, was just one of many efforts to develop the region's resources. Sutter had dreams of building a personal empire, a settlement where he controlled trade, agriculture, and manufacturing. Ironically, it was the discovery on his land, something that could have made him the wealthiest man alive, that would destroy his dreams instead. For weeks, James Marshall tried to keep the discovery secret. Sutter feared what would happen if word got out, workers abandoning their jobs, chaos erupting over the land, and lawlessness sweeping through the frontier. But secrets, especially ones that shine, cannot be hidden for long. Rumors began circulating in local taverns and trading posts. Miners from the Sierra foothills wandered into settlements with small vials of yellow flakes. Sailors reported whispers of fields filled with gold. And newspapers, eager for any story that might captivate readers in New York, Boston, or London, began printing headlines that seemed too extraordinary to believe. But the true explosion of global interest came in December 1848, when President James K. Polk addressed Congress and confirmed the truth. The accounts of the abundance of gold are of such an extraordinary character as would scarcely command belief, were they not corroborated by authentic reports. With Polk's announcement, the fuse was lit. Thousands began packing their belongings, selling their homes, abandoning their jobs, and preparing for a journey that would test their endurance, morality, and luck. Some came seeking fortune. Others came seeking escape. But all came chasing a dream, the hope that gold, lying beneath the soil of a distant land, would change their lives forever. The year was 1849, and the world seemed to tilt toward California. They came to be known as the 49ers, a name that would echo through American history. But they came from far beyond the borders of the United States. Ships departed from China, Chile, Peru, Australia, and Europe. Farmers, blacksmiths, sailors, bankers, and even schoolteachers joined the exodus. It was the largest voluntary migration in American history. Those who left from the eastern United States faced 3 treacherous routes, each as deadly as it was uncertain. A grueling 3,000-mile trek across plains, deserts, and mountain ranges. Wagons crawled westward, fighting harsh weather, disease, starvation, and the constant threat of attack. Cholera outbreaks decimated wagon trains, leaving trails marked by crude graves. Yet still, people pushed forward. Travelers sailed to Central America, crossed the dense and dangerous jungles of Panama, often by foot or canoe, and waited for a ship to carry them north to San Francisco. Malaria, dysentery, and robbery plagued the route, but it was faster than crossing the continent. A daunting 5-month journey circling the southernmost tip of South America, where storms, ice, and unpredictable seas claimed countless ships. Whether on foot or by sea, the journey was brutal. But hope, fueled by stories of gold lying everywhere, pulled people onward. By the spring of 1849, San Francisco, once a quiet settlement of a few hundred, had exploded into a chaotic, roaring boomtown. Tents and wooden shacks stretched along the shoreline. Ships arrived daily, often abandoned as entire crews fled to the goldfields. The harbor filled with hundreds of vessels left to rot, their masts forming a forest of empty ships. Prices skyrocketed. A single egg could cost $1. A shovel could cost 20. Lumber, tools, and food became more valuable than gold itself. Gambling halls, saloons, and makeshift hotels crowded every corner of the muddy streets. Violence was common, law enforcement nearly non-existent, and fires swept through the city repeatedly, destroying everything in their path. Yet despite the chaos, San Francisco pulsed with energy. It was a city alive with ambition, desperation, and possibility. For many, it was the final stop before heading to the real battlefield, the rivers and ravines of the Sierra Nevada. When the 49ers reached the goldfields, they found a landscape far different from the shimmering fantasies printed in newspaper headlines. Yes, gold existed, but finding it required backbreaking labor, endless hours of panning, and an unyielding spirit. Miners woke before dawn, working knee-deep in icy water. They sifted gravel and mud through wooden pans and cradles. Days might pass without a single flake. Supplies ran low. Conflicts erupted over claims, sometimes turning deadly. The simplest form of mining, panning, was slow but accessible. Riverbeds and streams became crowded, filled with miners kneeling in the water, their hands numb, their backs aching. More advanced methods, like sluice boxes and rockers, helped increase production, but the work remained grueling. Those who arrived early often succeeded. Those who arrived late found the rivers already claimed, the easy gold already gone. They dug deeper, carving into hillsides, tunneling through the earth, and eventually turning to industrial methods that would reshape entire landscapes. And through it all, stories circulated of spectacular discoveries, men who struck it rich with a single shovel's worth of soil. But for every one success story, there were hundreds who left the fields empty-handed. The gold rush did more than create wealth, it created a new society. Cultures collided in the mining camps. Americans, Mexicans, Chinese immigrants, Europeans, African Americans, indigenous people, and South Americans all lived and labored side by side, sometimes cooperating, often clashing. Racism, competition, and discrimination erupted across the camps. Foreign miners were taxed, excluded, or violently pushed out. Indigenous populations suffered catastrophic losses as disease, hunger, and violence swept through their communities. But amid the tension, a new identity began to form. California became a place where class, heritage, and social status meant little. What mattered was grit, daring, and endurance. Anyone could strike gold. Anyone could fail. It was a land of extremes, of dreamers and desperate men, of opportunity and ruin. And in 1850, just 2 years after Marshall found that first nugget, California became the 31st state of the United States. The gold rush had transformed it forever. By the late summer of 1849, the gold fields of California had transformed into a strange, rugged civilization, one unlike any place in the world. Makeshift settlements called mining camps appeared along every river, creek, and gulch in the Sierra Nevada. Each of these camps had its own personality, some were orderly and well-run, others wild and lawless, and many little more than muddy clusters of tents strewn between pine forests and rocky hills. People came and went constantly. Camps rose and vanished within months, sometimes weeks, depending on how quickly the gold played out. Life in these communities was raw, harsh, and unpredictable. Most miners lived in canvas tents or log lean-tos. Their beds were piles of pine needles, their meals often nothing more than beans, salt pork, and stale bread. Clean water was scarce, medical help non-existent, and the nearest doctor often dozens of miles away. Yet the camps bustled with activity from dawn to dusk, men hammering picks into rock, water sloshing through sluice boxes, and the steady rhythm of shovels filling wooden pans. At night, the goldfields erupted into a different kind of chaos. Lanterns lit the camps with flickering orange glows as miners gathered around smoky fires, sharing food, swapping stories, or fiercely guarding their claims from the desperate and the greedy. Music drifted from saloons, rough violin notes, pounding piano keys, and the clatter of boots on wooden floors. Fights broke out easily, sometimes over money, sometimes over pride, and sometimes simply because someone had found gold and someone else had not. But through all the hardship, morale remained mysteriously unbroken. The dream of gold, always gold, kept men digging deeper, searching harder, believing that tomorrow might bring the strike that would change everything. The gold rush brought people from every corner of the earth, but it did not bring law and order. In the early months, there were no police, no courts, no jails, and no official judges. What existed instead was something far more unpredictable: miners' justice. When crimes occurred, and they occurred often, the miners held meetings called miners' courts. These were rough, improvised gatherings held beneath pine trees or beside riverbanks. A crowd would form, a foreman or respected miner would act as a judge, and the accused would be given a chance to defend himself. For minor crimes like gambling, fraud, theft of tools, or disorderly behavior, punishments might include flogging, fines, or banishment from the camp. But theft of gold was considered a crime of the highest order. Gold was survival. It was hope. It was the very reason men had risked their lives to come west. And so, when someone was caught stealing another man's gold, the punishment could be swift and severe, sometimes even execution by hanging. Saloon owners often played the role of peacekeepers, using their establishments as unofficial meeting halls. Still, violence erupted frequently. Drunken brawls filled the nights, and disputes over claims led to shootouts in broad daylight. With thousands of armed, exhausted, frustrated men crowded into a lawless frontier, chaos was inevitable. Yet amid this turmoil, communities slowly discovered the need for stability. Some camps elected constables. Others established more formal courts. And gradually, the rough justice of the early days gave way to more organized systems. But the scars of those lawless months would remain etched into California's story forever. Despite being known as a world dominated by men, the gold rush also brought women, though far fewer in number. In the earliest period, women made up less than 5% of the population in the goldfields. Many were the wives, daughters, or relatives of miners, others came seeking their own fortune. Some came to work as cooks, innkeepers, seamstresses, or laundresses, profits that often exceeded what miners earned from gold. A woman could charge $1 for doing a single shirt's laundry. A meal cooked in a clean kitchen could cost several dollars. And women who operated boarding houses sometimes earned more stable income than miners who worked 12-hour days in the rivers. Women also became important social anchors in a land otherwise consumed by restlessness and chaos. Letters from wives and mothers back home became the emotional lifelines of miners, many of whom endured deep loneliness and isolation. Some women broke traditional boundaries. A few took up mining themselves, swinging picks alongside men. Others became entrepreneurs, running businesses, organizing supply routes, or managing saloons. Their presence helped transform rough mining camps into communities, giving stability to a land otherwise shaped by constant movement and fierce ambition. The gold rush reshaped California into one of the most diverse places on Earth. People arrived from China, Mexico, Chile, Peru, France, Germany, Australia, and Britain, each bringing their own traditions, tools, and mining methods. Chinese immigrants, in particular, played a major role. Many arrived in 1850, traveling across the Pacific in large groups. They worked diligently, built organized mining teams, and lived with strict discipline. Their methods were efficient, often producing gold from areas other miners had abandoned. But their success also led to resentment. Anti-Chinese violence, exclusion, and discriminatory taxes became common, especially as the easy gold began to disappear. Mexican and Chilean miners were among the most skilled in the world. They introduced technologies such as the arrastra, a stone-powered grinding mill that crushed ore to free embedded gold. Yet they too faced discrimination, harassment, and forced expulsion from claims. European immigrants brought their own expertise. German miners used advanced engineering techniques. French immigrants opened bakeries, restaurants, and businesses that became essential to mining towns. African Americans, both free and formerly enslaved, also joined the rush, some achieving remarkable success in mining, business, or land ownership. California's cultural mosaic was rich, vibrant, and unprecedented. But it was also tense. Competition for gold made neighbors into rivals and sometimes enemies. The gold rush was not merely an economic event, it was a social collision that redefined identity, opportunity, and belonging in America. While thousands of miners struggled in rivers and ravines, others discovered a far more profitable path, selling supplies, services, and food to the miners. These were the real winners of the gold rush. Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco with a load of canvas to sell tents. But miners needed durable pants more than tents, so Strauss began producing sturdy work trousers, pants that would later become known as blue jeans. Merchants like Sam Brannan became extraordinarily wealthy. Brannan purchased every pick, pan, and shovel in San Francisco and then ran through the streets shouting, "Gold! Gold on the American River." He sold his 20-cent pans for $15 each and became California's first millionaire. Saloons, gambling halls, and restaurants thrived. Some miners spent their entire findings in a single night of drinking or gambling. Hotels, supply stores, shipping companies, and stagecoach lines sprang up overnight. The price of a simple wooden plank soared as booming towns demanded lumber faster than ships could deliver it. Entrepreneurs who understood supply and demand gained fortunes greater than most miners could ever imagine. While miners chased the dream of gold hidden beneath the earth, entrepreneurs profited from gold hidden in opportunity. The gold rush created a new model of American capitalism, one built on risk, vision, and relentless pursuit of profit. The gold rush forever transformed California's environment, often in devastating ways. Rivers that once flowed clear turned muddy and polluted. Forests were cut down for lumber. Hillsides were carved apart by miners' tools and washed away by water cannons. Hydraulic mining, introduced in the early 1850s, became one of the most destructive techniques of all. Miners used powerful streams of water to blast apart entire mountains, tearing through soil and stone to expose hidden gold. The sediment washed into rivers, burying farmland, destroying ecosystems, and raising riverbeds so high that major floods swept through the Central Valley. Wildlife vanished. Fish populations collapsed. Indigenous food sources disappeared. What began as a search for gold turned into an environmental catastrophe, the consequences of which continue to shape California's landscape even today. Yet in the minds of the miners, survival came first. Few paused to consider the future. They lived day by day, driven by the desperate need to find enough gold to survive another week, or perhaps enough to finally return home with a fortune. Behind the glittering dream of gold lay a grim and often tragic reality. Disease swept through the camps, cholera, scurvy, dysentery, and pneumonia claimed countless lives. Accidents were common, cave-ins, explosions, drowning, and fires. Thousands died anonymously, buried in unmarked graves along trails or near mining camps. Families back home often never learn what happened to their loved ones. For indigenous communities, the cost was even more severe. The sudden arrival of thousands of miners disrupted their lands, their food sources, their traditions, and their ways of life. Violence, displacement, and disease devastated native populations. Entire villages were destroyed. Some estimates suggest that the indigenous population of California fell by more than 80% in the decades following the gold rush, a tragedy too often forgotten. And for many miners, the emotional toll was immense. Letters from home described births, deaths, marriages, and hardships they could not share. Dreams of fortune turned into nightmares of isolation, regret, and relentless labor. Many returned home poorer than when they arrived. The gold rush was not merely a story of triumph. It was a story of sacrifice, loss, and the harsh reality of chasing dreams in a hostile land. By the early 1850s, the age of the lone prospector began to fade. The simple days of men kneeling in rivers with pans were disappearing. The easy gold, the flakes and nuggets lying near the surface, had been taken by the earliest arrivals. What remained was harder to reach, buried deep within mountain rock or locked inside layers of gravel and clay. Extracting it required more than a pickaxe and a dream. It required machinery, manpower, and investment. And so, California entered a new phase of the gold rush, the rise of industrial mining. Large companies began buying up claims, consolidating land, and pushing out individual miners who could not compete. They built stamp mills, massive machines that pulverized rock into dust, powered by steam engines or rushing water. They purchased entire hillsides, tunneled deep into the earth, and used hydraulic cannons to blast away mountains that had stood for thousands of years. The sound of industrial mining echoed through the valleys, iron wheels grinding, heavy pistons slamming, water cannons roaring like thunder. What had begun as a personal quest for fortune evolved into a corporate machine, with investors in New York, Boston, and even Europe financing large-scale extraction. For many small miners, this shift was devastating. Their simple tools were no match for industrial power. Some sold their claims for pennies. Others were forced out, drifting toward new jobs, new towns, or new disappointments. The dream of instant riches faded as California transformed from a frontier of opportunity into a battleground of corporate control. While mining grew increasingly industrial, California's cities exploded with life. San Francisco, once a sleepy coastal town, had grown into a booming metropolis of merchants, miners, sailors, entrepreneurs, and immigrants. Wooden buildings rose faster than lumber could arrive. Streets filled with wagons, horses, and people shouting in a dozen languages. Saloons, theaters, boarding houses, and gambling halls lined the streets, illuminated by flickering gas lamps. Ships from around the world crowded the harbor, so many that abandoned vessels were sometimes converted into hotels, prisons, or shops. Fires ravaged the city repeatedly, entire blocks burned to ashes, yet each time San Francisco rebuilt bigger and faster. Further inland, new towns appeared overnight: Sonora, Placerville, Nevada City, Grass Valley, Auburn, Columbia, Angels Camp. Some blossomed into thriving communities. Others vanished in a matter of months when the gold nearby dried up. Boomtowns were chaotic, energetic, dangerous, and vibrant. They attracted artists, gamblers, outlaws, clerks, cooks, women seeking opportunity, and children born into the goldfields. They were melting pots of humanity where fortunes were made and lost daily. And though the gold would eventually run thin, these towns became the backbone of modern California, their foundations laid by the hopes of tens of thousands. With tens of thousands flooding into California, the region could no longer survive with makeshift justice and improvised leadership. Crime rose sharply. Disputes over land and water rights erupted everywhere. Immigrants clashed with Americans. Miners clashed with corporations. Outlaws roamed the roads, robbing travelers and stealing gold. California needed law. It needed order. It needed a government. In 1849, delegates gathered in Monterey to draft the Constitution, a bold move considering California was still technically a territory. Their constitution outlawed slavery, a decision that would thrust California into the national political battlefield. After intense debate in Congress, the Compromise of 1850 admitted California as the 31st state. Statehood brought sheriffs, judges, formal courts, and law enforcement. But taming the frontier was no simple task. Vigilance committees, groups of armed citizens, took justice into their own hands, hanging criminals, exiling troublemakers, and battling corruption. Some saw them as heroes. Others saw them as mobs. Still, the establishment of law began transforming California from a wild frontier into an organized society. Roads were built. Schools opened. Taxes were collected. Infrastructure grew. The goldfields, once the heart of lawlessness, now existed within a rapidly developing state. As the surface gold vanished, new techniques emerged that pushed mining into deeper layers of earth. Technology became the key to extracting gold at greater depths. Hard rock mining, a brutal and dangerous method, required drilling shafts that descended hundreds of feet. Miners used chisels and black powder to blast apart quartz veins, hauling the rock to the surface for crushing. Underground tunnels were hot, dark, narrow, and deadly. Cave-ins occurred regularly, trapping miners beneath tons of rock. Poisonous gases accumulated inside shafts. Water seeped in constantly. And yet men risked everything for the chance to uncover gold-rich quartz. Hydraulic mining, meanwhile, became the most visually dramatic technique of the era. Miners directed high-pressure water jets at hillsides, washing away layers of soil and unearthing ancient riverbeds where gold had settled long ago. The spectacle was astonishing, entire mountains collapsing under torrents of water, turning the earth into rivers of mud and broken stone. But this method came with a catastrophic price. Sediment-filled rivers smothered farmlands and caused destructive flooding. Farmers sued mining companies, and after decades of legal battles, hydraulic mining was heavily restricted in 1884, the first major environmental regulation in U.S. history. In their quest for gold, miners triggered technological innovation that would shape future industries, from engineering to transportation to hydraulic power. Yet every advance came with new costs, new dangers, and new scars upon the land. The gold rush drew people from across the world, creating one of the most diverse societies of the 19th century. Chinese immigrants built thriving Chinatowns in San Francisco, Marysville, and Sacramento. Latin American miners introduced advanced techniques. European artisans brought skills that transformed local crafts, baking, and commerce. Sailors deserted ships to join the goldfields. Artists came to sketch the rough, beautiful chaos of frontier life. Entrepreneurs arrived with new ideas, technologies, and ambitions. California became a global crossroads where English mingled with Spanish, Chinese, French, Italian, German, and dozens of indigenous languages. Yet diversity brought tension. Anti-immigrant riots erupted. Discriminatory taxes targeted foreign miners. Chinese workers faced violence, exclusion, and laws that denied them citizenship. Native peoples suffered catastrophic population loss due to disease, displacement, and violence. Californios, Mexican landowners, lost much of their land to court battles, debt, and discriminatory policies. Still, despite the injustice, California's multicultural foundation endured. The gold rush forever reshaped the state's identity, making it a place where cultures collided, blended, and helped build a society unlike any other in America. For every miner who struck it rich, thousands did not. And even the wealthy sometimes lost everything in the volatile economy of the goldfields. Some miners became legends, like Lucky Baldwin, who found a massive gold deposit and later became a powerful landowner. Others found just enough to buy land, start farms, or open businesses. Many turned their gold earnings into opportunity rather than luxury. But there were countless tragedies too. Men gambled away their entire fortunes in a single night. Others wasted their savings on alcohol or overpriced goods. Some were robbed on their way home. A few died just days before returning to their families. The gold rush created millionaires, but it also created debt, desperation, and disillusionment. It was a gamble, one where luck often mattered more than skill, and where fate could change with a single discovery or a single mistake. In the end, the true fortunes of the gold rush were not always measured in gold dust. They were measured in lives changed, dreams pursued, and the birth of a new society built from ambition and sacrifice. By the late 1850s, the gold rush was no longer a frenzy. The easy gold was gone. Industrial companies dominated the industry. Many miners had moved on to Nevada, Colorado, Montana, or back home. But California had been transformed forever. The population had exploded from 15,000 to more than 300,000 in less than a decade. Towns became cities. Roads, bridges, and railways connected once isolated regions. Banking, commerce, and agriculture blossomed. The gold rush had jump-started the state's economy, setting the stage for California to become a global powerhouse. The cultural impact was equally profound. California became a land of opportunity, reinvention, innovation, and diversity. The spirit of the gold rush, the belief that fortune could be made with courage and ambition, became deeply embedded in California's identity. Yet the scars remained. Indigenous communities suffered irreversible losses. Ecosystems were destroyed. Rivers were reshaped. Mountains were carved apart. The human and environmental cost of the gold rush was immense, and its shadows still linger. Still, for better or worse, the gold rush had built California. It turned a remote frontier into a thriving state. It sparked dreams that echoed across the world. And it left behind a story of courage, greed, hope, tragedy, and transformation, one that continues to shape the land and its people to this day.